Absolutely.
Mr. Wright yields.
Keith, I just have a few questions on this bill, and you talked a lot, or it's been talked a lot about harassment of tenants, and I'm wondering if there's anything in the bill that holds NYCHA to the same standards that you would hold private developers to as far as tenant harassment. Is there anything in the bill that addresses that?
Well, this bill has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with a New York City Housing Authority property. It's totally different entities, and people do often get them confused, but this is for rent-stabilized, rent-controlled units in the city of New York, which has nothing to do with the New York City Public Housing.
Understood. It was a lot of talk about harassment of tenants, and I know we've heard some pretty good horror stories about the properties that are under NYCHA control, so I was just kind of wondering about that. Only other question I would have for you would be, is there anything in this bill, as I understand it, we don't deal with rent control up here in upstate. We just deal with really high property taxes. But I'm wondering, as I understand it, it's probably 1 unit per person, correct? I mean, that's kind of, you can't have multiple units.
I think what you're talking about is a landlord being able to keep 1 unit for his or herself. Is that what you're talking about?
No, not really, as you did a good job addressing that, although I disagree with the premise. I think if a landlord owns the property and he wants his entire family in there, he should certainly have the right to house his family where he sees fit. After all, it's about building communities, as we heard earlier. But is there anything that would prevent a person that has a rent-controlled apartment from having another rent-controlled apartment? Specifically, I'm asking.
Yeah, well, I think I know what you're referring to, and in New York, in our laws, it has to be considered a primary residence.
A primary residence. How could it be then that a congressman from New York City named Charlie Rangel had 4 rent-controlled apartments at one time? And would this bill prevent him from doing that?
Well, first of all, let me just tell you, and I'm so glad you brought that up.
Thank you.
First of all, they were not his residences. They were used as offices. And back then, what you don't understand, and what you may not know because you yourself have said that you don't have rent control or rent stabilization up here.
We have a free market up here.
Oh, you have a free market, okay.
Yeah.
So it might be a little foreign to you. But back then, it was virtually, there was a problem in terms of renting some apartments. And Charlie Rangel rented some apartments for his office space, for his campaign fundraising and such. So that was a misconception that the media has played out, and if all you have to do is ask me, and I'll tell you.
Okay, so then to that end, so one of those apartments was his campaign office. In no way was it a residence. It was his campaign office. Is that the same campaign office that he stiffed the people of New York and didn't pay the rent on?
Well, let me just say this. I think what you're trying to do is to engage in a discussion that is not really particularly germane to the bill in chief.
I think it's very germane.
The bill in chief. However, I don't think that, your question is he stiff people. Rent's paid in full.
The rent is paid in full?
Rent's paid in full.
Okay. At what
Rent's
point?
paid in full.
Well, at what point was that paid in full? Because it was about $87,000 that the people of New York were owed on that rent-controlled apartment.
I don't know where you're getting your information from, Mr. McLaughlin.
New York papers.
I don't think so. I don't know how old those papers are.
Last
Rent
year.
paid in full. And your questions are not particularly germane.
They're germane in a sense.
This bill is all
They are
about.
germane in the sense that we have got a situation here where one person controlled 4 apartments, but yet a landlord.
I'm talking about over 1.1 million apartments, over 2.4 million people that need to be protected. And that's what this bill is all about. That's what this bill does, and that's what we're trying to vote and bring to a vote. Now, if you want to engage in some old newspaper articles.
Oh, they're not that old, Keith.
Feel free to do that. And I'd be more than happy to engage in that discussion with you. But as far as your line of questioning, I don't think it's germane to what's going
They're
on.
not that old. It was last year. And by the way, it is germane when we have one person controlling 4 apartments when your whole premise of the
But
bill.
he's not the owner of the building. Not
But-
the owner of the building. Not the owner. We're talking about an owner
Wait,
being able to control and warehouse.
Okay.
In warehouse.
So he owns the
Particular
building, by the way. He should be able to do what he wants with his building. He has much more right to control the 4 units than a renter does, who, by the way, is a U.S. congressman making $175,000 a year. I would say the owner of that property has much more right to warehouse those units. But that being said, it's germane when your whole premise of your bill is to provide housing to people that need it, and you have one person controlling 4 units. So it is germane, but let me move on.
Please do.
If price controls work, and that's what this is price controls, and it is part of the socialist movement and has been since the early 1900s when it was first introduced. If price controls worked, why aren't they in effect in every single big city in America?
I think probably because New York is so enlightened and so far ahead of the rest of all the other states you're talking about.
Well, if we're that enlightened, why is this such a failure? Because after 40 years, this is no longer an experiment. It is a failure, and I understand your heart is in the right place, and I don't question that at all, Keith. I understand your heart's in the right place. But I think the evidence is clear, and economist after economist would back that up, that price controls do not work, which is why, by the way, we have a market-based economy in most of the cities in America, and throughout our economy, it is market-based, not price control-based. So I still don't understand how you can make the claim that this is working in New York City when every speaker that's got up in favor of it is talking about what a disaster New York City's housing is right now and how tough it is for folks to find apartments.
Your question.
My question is, I don't know how you can justify this, but anyway.
Because I live it every day, Mr. McLaughlin. As you said, admittedly, you don't have it up here. You don't have it in your district. I live it each and every day. And this is something that is needed to make sure that our neighborhoods stay stabilized, to make sure that working people can still become part of the fabric of New York City. I can tell you what a successful neighborhood in New York City is. And the successful neighborhood is when you have people of means, working class folks, and people that are very poor.
Yep.
This becomes a real strong point of creating a neighborhood, and this is the neighborhoods that we'd want to preserve in the city of New York and beyond.
I
Whether
agree.
it's Rockland County, Westchester County, and Nassau County.
Well, I agree with you. I just think that your methodology of achieving that is clearly flawed, and history bears that out after, 40-plus years of rent control in New York City, and the situation getting worse and worse, where other cities that had it have moved away from it, and they still have thriving neighborhoods, and they still have diverse neighborhoods, and they don't have what you folks are complaining about, the ultra-rich being able to take over the city, which we don't want. We want that diversity. So I don't question your motivation. I just question the methodology of how we're getting there. But thank you, Mr. Wright. Appreciate your time on this.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill, Mr. McLaughlin.
The reason that price controls don't work and never will work is because we have a market-based economy in this country. And there is, when you have price controls like this, with rent control, and that's all it is price control, you're actually hurting the very people you seek to help. And again, I understand that everybody wants to help those that need it, but I think we're doing exactly the opposite with rent control. And you have an incentive for people to never move, no matter how wealthy they become. They're never going to give up that apartment. That freezes other folks out of the market, and it impacts their ability to live in the neighborhoods that you seek them. We all want them to live in, to have a thriving, vital, thriving city like New York City struggles to be sometimes. So I think that the methodology here is wrong. The hearts are in the right place. And after 40 years, as I said earlier, I don't think you can call this an experiment any longer. I think at this point, it is a failure. What rent controls do is keep vacancy low and housing scarce for those that need it the most. Thank you.